A cowboy took in his neighbor's abandoned mail-order bride and found true love. In his cabin, the knock on Eli Mercer's cabin door came so soft he almost ignored it. The storm had been building since noon, rolling down from the Wyoming mountains like something alive and angry. Wind clawed at the pine logs of his cabin and shoved snow against the windows in thick white waves. The world outside had disappeared under ice and fury. No sane person would be traveling in weather like this, which meant whoever stood on his porch was not traveling by choice. Eli set down his leatherwork and reached for the Winchester hanging above the door. 35 winters in Wyoming had taught him one thing: trouble did not knock politely. The second knock came weaker than the first. He opened the door, and the wind tried to rip it from his hands. A woman stood there, half buried in snow. Her dark blue wool dress was frozen stiff. Ice clung to her hair, which might have been auburn under all that frost. Her lips were past blue. One hand gripped a small carpet bag, like it was the only thing keeping her alive. She looked less like a visitor and more like something the storm had tried to kill and failed. Eli did not ask questions. He caught her by the arm and pulled her inside, slamming the door against the screaming wind. She shook so hard, her teeth rattled like loose coins. "Change out of that," he said, already turning his back and pulling a flannel shirt from a peg. "Wet clothes will kill you faster than a bullet." He kept his eyes on the stove while she struggled with frozen buttons. When the rustling stopped, he turned. She stood wrapped in his shirt, which hung to her knees. Her dress lay on the floor like shed skin. She looked small, too small for a storm like that. He handed her a wool blanket and guided her to the chair closest to the stove. Coffee first, then bean soup, thick with pork and salt. She drank like someone remembering how to live. Color slowly crept back into her cheeks. When she finished eating, he finally asked, "Why are you here?" Her eyes were green like summer sage, steady despite exhaustion. "Owen Blackledge brought me from Boston to be his wife," she said. "He changed his mind at the station." Eli knew the name. Blackledge owned the biggest ranch in the valley, a man who measured people the same way he measured cattle. "He left you in this?" Eli asked. "At the crossroads. Gave me coach fare and a paper saying the agreement was ended." Her voice did not shake. "The hotel wanted payment in advance. The money wasn't enough for room and food both." She reached into her carpet bag and handed him the folded paper. Agreement terminated due to unsuitability for ranch requirements. Unsuitability. Eli studied her across the table. Clean hands that knew work. Straight spine. Educated voice. No tears. "You walked 3 miles in this storm?" he asked. There was nowhere else to go. Outside, the wind howled like it wanted to tear the roof away. Eli added another log to the fire. "You can stay here until the storm breaks," he said. "Name's Eli Mercer. Margaret Doyle. Maggie." She glanced around the one-room cabin. Bed in the corner. Tools lined neat on pegs. Rifle above the door. Simple, but solid. "I can work," she said quickly. "Cook. Clean. Mend. I won't be a burden." "Nobody's talking about burden," Eli replied. "Storm like this, you give shelter. That's it." She studied him carefully. "You're not asking why he sent me away," she said later, when the fire burned low and the storm raged harder. Eli stared into the stove's red glow. "Owen Blackledge doesn't do anything without profit," he said quietly. "Pretty woman comes from Boston. He throws her out in a blizzard. That ain't about suitability. That's about something else." Silence settled between them. "You think I'm pretty?" she asked softly. "I think you're alive," he said. Tonight, that's what matters. Near dawn, the storm eased. Snow still fell thick, but the wind lost its teeth. Eli woke first, rebuilt the fire, started biscuits and coffee. When Maggie sat up in his bed, wrapped in his mother's old quilt, she looked less like a ghost and more like a woman. "Storm's breaking," he said, "but roads will be buried for days." "I should leave soon," she began. "You should eat," he cut in. They ate at the small pine table, biscuits and gravy, coffee black as midnight. Afterward, she cleared the plates without being asked. "I meant what I said," she told him. "I'll work." "Everybody works here," Eli replied. "That's just living." Through the frost-covered window, the world looked buried and silent. The barn was a dark shape in white emptiness. The mountains had vanished behind clouds. They were cut off from everything. Might as well have been the last two people left alive. Eli sat back down with his leather and needle, but he was not thinking about the broken bridle anymore. He was watching the way she moved. Careful, determined, refusing to look defeated. He had lived alone for years. Quiet days, quiet nights, cattle and work, and the steady rhythm of survival. Now there was a woman standing at his window, breathing warmth against cold glass, while snow fell outside like promises or threats. The storm had brought her to his door, and somewhere deep in his chest, Eli knew nothing about his life was going to stay the same. The storm did not pass in a single night. It settled over the valley for 3 long days, sealing the cabin in white silence. Snow pressed against the walls. The roof groaned under its weight. The world beyond the door might as well not have existed. Inside, life found a rhythm. Maggie rose with Eli before dawn. She stirred oats while he broke ice in the water bucket. She swept the floor. He fed the stove. They moved around each other carefully at first, like strangers learning the shape of the same room. On the second morning, she placed a stack of letters on the table between them. "He wrote these for 2 months," she said. Eli wiped his hands and sat down. The paper was thick and expensive. The ink bold and confident. Promises filled every page. A good home, respect, partnership, a proper wedding in spring. He said he needed a wife who could read and write, Maggie continued, to help with ranch accounts. Eli read each line slowly. Sweet words, thoughtful phrases, a man selling a future. "And then?" he asked. "He took one look at me at the station and said I was too refined for ranch life." Eli's jaw tightened. He picked up the final paper, the one written in haste. Agreement terminated. No further obligation. "You were paperwork," he said quietly. Her chin lifted. "Yes." He leaned back in his chair, thinking. "Owen's been buying land along Sweetwater Creek," he said. "Railroad's coming through next year. Married men sometimes hold different claim rights. Might be he needed a wife for a deal. Then the deal changed." Maggie looked at him sharply. "So I was never meant to be a wife, just leverage." "Maybe." She turned to the window, staring at the white world. "I sold my mother's wedding ring to buy proper dresses," she said. "Sold her books, her piano, everything." Eli wanted to offer comfort, but he did not know how to dress grief in soft words. "You took a chance," he said instead. "That ain't foolish." That afternoon, he handed her a piece of pine and his carving knife. "Watch," he said. His hands moved steady and sure, shaving curls of wood. Within minutes, the rough shape of a spoon appeared. "For your coffee," he said. She ran her fingers over the smooth wood. "Different kinds of beauty," she murmured. Different kinds of useful, he replied. On the third morning, they walked to the barn together. Snow reached her knees. She stuffed rags into Eli's spare boots and wore his heavy coat. Inside, the cattle breathed clouds into the cold air. One heifer stood apart, restless. "She'll calf soon," Eli said. Maggie held the lantern steady while he checked the animal. Her face glowed gold in the light. "She's beautiful," Maggie said. "She's profitable," Eli answered. She smiled at him. "You can say both." He hesitated. "She's beautiful and profitable." Her laugh filled the barn, bright and sudden. It did something to his chest he did not have words for. That night the cold turned bitter, the kind that snapped nails from wood and froze breath mid-air. Even with the stove roaring, the cabin chilled. Eli heard her teeth chattering from the bed. "This is foolish," she whispered into the dark. "You take the bed." "Neither of us is freezing for the sake of propriety," he said. He dragged his buffalo robe onto the bed and sat upright against the wall. "Body heat works better than pride," he added. There was a long pause. Then she shifted closer beneath the heavy robe. He placed one arm around her shoulders, careful, respectful, nothing more than survival. But she was warm and real and trembling against him. By dawn, she had fallen asleep with her head resting lightly against his shoulder. Eli did not move. Something had shifted. Not just warmth shared against the cold, but trust. On the fourth morning, the storm broke, and with it came horses. Eli saw them first from the barn. Owen Blackledge rode at the front, Sheriff Amos Hale beside him, 2 hired men behind. Maggie stepped onto the porch before Eli could stop her. "I am not property," she said before Owen even spoke. Owen's face reddened. "I paid for her passage," he snapped. "She's my bride." "You terminated the agreement," Maggie replied, holding up the paper. "Your own words." The sheriff read it slowly. "Seems clear enough," he muttered. Owen leaned forward in his saddle. "She's staying here," he accused. "Of her own free will," Eli said calmly. Sheriff Hale looked at Maggie. "Anyone forcing you to stay?" "No." "Anyone mistreating you?" "No." Owen's hand hovered near his gun. "You'll regret this," he warned. Eli's voice stayed steady. "Careful with threats." The wind picked up around them, rattling the shutters. Finally, Owen turned his horse. "This isn't over." When the riders disappeared down the trail, Maggie's hands began to shake. "He'll make trouble," she said. "Let him," Eli answered. That night, they found a dead chicken on the porch, a warning. The valley began to whisper. Eli had stolen Owen's bride. Maggie's reputation hung by a thread. By week's end, Reverend Cole and Sheriff Hale came to the cabin. Marriage would solve the talk, the Reverend suggested gently. Eli looked at Maggie. "I want you safe," he said. "That's not what I asked," she replied. "If we marry," he said slowly, "it'll be because we choose it, not because Owen forces our hand." She nodded. "Then we wait." Sunday came bright and cold. The church was full. Maggie stood before the congregation and told the truth. Every letter, every promise, every lie. When she finished, silence filled the room. Then Mrs. Patterson stood. Then old Tom Garrett. Then others. Owen stormed out, red-faced and defeated for the moment. That evening, Eli placed a small box on the table. Inside lay his mother's thin gold ring. "I'm not asking you to wear it," he said, "just to know it's yours if you ever want it." Maggie held it in the lamplight. "When we're ready," she said, The ring remained on the shelf, but something between them had already begun to feel like promise. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments, I'm really curious to know. The barn burned on the day of their wedding. Smoke rose against a sky so clear it looked almost cruel. The cottonwood tree above Sweetwater Creek stood bright with new green leaves as neighbors gathered beneath it. Maggie wore her mother's blue dress, mended so many times, the thread made its own quiet pattern. Eli stood beside her in his best shirt, boots polished as much as old leather would allow. They had chosen open sky instead of church walls, chosen each other instead of gossip. "Do you take this woman?" Reverend Cole asked. "I do," Eli answered, before the wind could steal the words. "And do you take this man?" "I do," Maggie said, just as steady. His mother's ring slid onto her finger like it had been waiting there all along. Someone whooped. Children laughed. Tables of food stretched along the creek bank. For the first time since the blizzard, the valley felt light. Then someone shouted, "Fire!" They ran. The hay barn was already swallowed in flames. Fire licked across the dry grass, reaching for the cabin. Eli did not think. He moved. "Bucket line!" he shouted. Men formed a chain from the creek. Women beat sparks with wet blankets. Maggie grabbed a shovel and began cutting a fire break through the grass, her wedding dress tearing on rock and thorn. The barn collapsed in a shower of sparks, but the cabin stood. When the flames finally died, Sheriff Hale rode up with Jake Coulter in irons, caught him running with a torch. Owen appeared soon after, calm in the saddle. "Shame about your barn," he said smoothly. Maggie walked straight to his horse, soot on her face, fire in her eyes. "Every board you burn proves I chose right." Owen looked around. The neighbors were still there, standing with the Mercers, protecting what remained. For the first time, he saw what he had failed to build. Community. He rode away without another word. That night, smoke still heavy in the air, Eli and Maggie stood in the doorway of their cabin. "We can rebuild," he said. "We will," she answered. And they did. The new barn rose from ashes with help from every ranch in the valley. Maggie began teaching in the church hall twice a week. The town women who once turned their backs now brought their daughters with hope instead of suspicion. Spring came, then summer, and one night, beneath the same cottonwood tree where they had married, Maggie told Eli she was carrying a child. 5 years passed the way seasons do, quiet and steady. The cabin grew from 1 room to 4. A porch stretched across the front. Fences straightened. Gardens flourished. Emma came first, fierce and curious. Thomas followed, stubborn and bright. Maggie taught in the new schoolhouse the community built together. Eli worked the land with hands that had grown gentler without losing moment strength. One autumn evening, a black carriage rolled down the trail. Owen Blackledge stepped out thinner, older, leaning on a cane. "I'm dying," he said plainly. He had come with a lawyer and a donation for the school, enough money to buy books for years. Silence held the valley. "I can't undo what I did," he said. "But maybe I can leave something better behind." The school board accepted the money for the children, not for him. Maggie forgave him long before that day, not for his sake, for hers. The railroad never cut through their land. Their ranch stayed what it had always been worth: home. Years later, on another clear evening, Maggie and Eli sat on their porch, while Emma and Thomas played in the yard. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if he hadn't left me at that crossroads?" Maggie asked softly. Eli shook his head. No, this is what happened. She leaned into him. The creek sang in the distance. The cottonwood leaves rustled overhead. Smoke curled gently from the chimney. I wish I'd knocked on your door sooner, she whispered. He laughed quietly. Then we wouldn't have this exact life. Inside the cabin that once held only a single bed and a lonely stove, 2 children slept safely. Books lined the shelves. Emma's drawings covered the wall. The ring still shone on Maggie's hand. The storm that once tried to bury her had become the beginning of everything. That door had opened once to save a life. It stayed open to build one. And every morning after, as long as the creek kept singing and the sun kept rising over Sweetwater Valley, Eli and Maggie chose each other again. Not because of a blizzard, not because of gossip, but because love built from kindness lasts longer than fire, and stronger than any man who ever tried to burn it down.